Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, 9 Instructional Needs of Adult Learners. Our webinar today is both sponsored by and presented by Essential Education, and we have Dan Griffith and Jen Denton, who are going to be our presenters today. I think everybody knows the routine. If you are in the chat box, go ahead and tell us where you're calling in from today. We would appreciate that. If you have any questions, you can submit those in the Q&A box. And with that, I will turn it over to Dan and Jen. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Appreciate it. And welcome, everybody. We're so glad you chose to come and hang out with us in the middle of December before break starts. This means some of you are here because you need one last CEU credit of some sort. Just so you can keep your certification. We appreciate it.
No shame in that game. No shame in that game.
We're glad you're here one way or the other, and we're excited to talk to you today about some instructional needs of adult learners. If you have questions, it would be great if you just put them in the chat. Jen and I are kind of co-doing this, and we'll keep an eye on chat. It's easier than switching over to the Q&A box. Just for us, there's only so many things my poor brain can monitor at one time. Love seeing where everybody's from. Thanks for introducing yourself there. Make sure we'll have a couple of spots where there's some feedback from you we'd love to get. And so make sure that your message area down at the bottom where the to spot is, that it says to everyone, not just hosts and panelists, but make sure that you're sending that message to everyone, and there's a little drop down that lets you change that. And thanks to all of you who are in snowy places for joining us. I saw some Floridians brazenly say it's beautiful in Florida, nice and sunny here, just to get after the people that were in Maine and Wisconsin and places like that where it's snowing. So with that, let's get going. We're going to talk today about 9 instructional needs of adult learners and a little bit of background just to start off. Of course, hopefully you've been exposed to this term, andragogy term. That's, I believe, how you say it. It's one of those kind of weird words, but that's how I've always said it. The art and science of teaching adults as opposed to pedagogy, or the art and science of teaching children. And so when we think about what is it that adults need that's different than what children need. Oh yeah, let me see. You don't need to see my face anymore. So let me do that. There we go. It'll be less distracting and I'll see the whole screen. Malcolm Knowles' theory attempts to develop an approach really specific to adult learning and adult education in general. And there's all kinds of things from brain differences, that has been studied, learning languages, brain scans of how an adult's brain processes information differently. I once heard that you can put about as many languages in a child's head as you want between age 0 and 6. But it isn't true as an adult, because once you've formulated kind of a cognitive pathway, it becomes much harder to align to that. And so there are some significant differences between adults and children, and 4 key principles that are not just universal, but really good foundational kind of cornerstones that we use in adult education. The first is that adults need to know why they're learning something. It's important. If the why isn't there, it can be really difficult to get somebody to engage and become interested and then develop neural pathways that hold the information. Adults need to learn experientially. It's because so much of their life is based on experience at that point. So much of their learning is based on the things that they've gone through and how they've lived their life and how they relate one thing to something else that happens so that it kind of anchors that. The third is that adults approach learning as problem solving. In most cases, we sometimes learn just for the sake of learning as an adult, but many adults are really busy and there isn't as much time to do that as you'd like. So you tend to learn something so that you can solve a problem. YouTube has, created this great university of DIY. If your water heater breaks, you go there, you learn how to fix it because you're solving the problem of your water heater. And then adults learn best when the topic is of immediate value, like the water heater. I'm going to learn what I need to do to deal with that because I don't want to take a cold shower tomorrow morning. And so that hot water is important. And so while these are not universally, applied to everybody, it doesn't mean that everybody is going to react to each of these in all situations. They're pretty good foundationally. And when you factor in certain things, experience, background, culture, you can kind of expand them and pick up the basis of kind of what adults need from these 4 core principles. So Jen, you want to take us into this?
Sure. So in pointing to our title today, 9 instructional needs of adult learners, we're going to kind of go into 3 different sections. That first section is going to focus on life-based learning, then value-based learning, and then follow up with goal-based learning. So this kind of learning triad. And then we're going to move into another section where we're going to be talking about learning that supports independence, learning that supports problem solving, and learning that supports communication. And then finally, we're going to pull it all together with 3 different types of instruction: flexible instruction, well-timed instruction, and quality diversified instruction. And all of the research that we're going to be presenting today on adult learning in general, I do want to point out mirrors some really, really recent emerging generation research that we have done specific to Gen Z. And these are those students that are currently, it seems like a wide range, but currently 7 to 25 years of age. So that upper end of this might be your lower end of students right now, but these students will become the bulk of all of our students. So we kind of, just need to watch this and those needs specific to Gen Z as they age. So we're going to note some commonalities as we go along today. So Dan, before we begin, how about you give our educators a little heads up about the self-evaluation tool that we're going to ask them to kind of work through the paces on today?
Yeah. So one of the things about these different areas that we're looking at is to get you to think about how strong you are in each of these areas. So as we go through each one of these 9 instructional needs, we'd ask you to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. So we're going to go in and explain what they are, how they kind of appear and are manifested in a classroom. And then I'd ask you to think about, is this something that I do on a regular basis? And from a scale of 1 to 10, how comfortable am I in this particular area? The goal would be at the end of this presentation that you might identify 1 or 2 areas where you could say, yeah, that's an area I want to work on come January. That's something that I want to build more into my classroom experience for my learners so that they're getting what they need to move forward. And so you're not going to be able to get everything, trying to do all 9 of these and everything you do would make a mess of things probably. But, if you could find 1 or 2 areas that you say, yeah, that's something I haven't really thought a lot about and I could do more with that. Then you'd have a focus area as you go into winter, spring, of 2023 to work with students. And I love that these are kind of 3 separate sections. And I just want to kind of give you a little framework that makes sense to me, which is the first 3 really focus on the context of your lesson. Are you providing context to your lesson in either life-based, value-based, or goal-based scenarios? The next 3 are all about the goal of a lesson. Does your lesson have an endpoint that relates to independence, problem solving, or communication? Because those are such critical aspects of being an adult, being a human in today's culture. And then the third 3, or the last 3, are all about the structure of your lesson. Are you providing structural support so that it's flexible, well-timed, and diversified? And if you think about that, context, goal, and structure, then I think it really breaks this into nice kind of buckets that you can look at and kind of see how your teaching is playing out in your classroom. So All right, so you're going to keep a score. We're going to try to remind you to write a score down next to that, for each of these ones as we go through them. So let's start with life-based learning. So from a context point of view, life-based learning is really, really important because we know that adults come to us with lots of experiences, things that they can build upon, things that add richness and interest to your classroom. They have all kinds of skills that you can draw on, things like that add context to everything that you're doing and allow you to differentiate instruction student to student. It really shifts things from theory to reality. So, when you're talking to someone about ratios, and they are someone who is really into cars and they know all about gear ratios and what it means to be a 411 rear end compared to a 388 rear end, and your 69 Impala or whatever. That is a real richness to their life that brings the idea of ratio from just some theory to some reality. And that connection anchors their learning. It allows them to hold on to it for a long time. So in your classroom, those anecdotes, stories, things that both from you and from your students that bring this context to what's going on is really critical. And then there's all kinds of everyday applications that you can apply as well. I mean, just about everything that you're teaching has some sort of an everyday application that somebody's going to run into somewhere, from math to language to reading skills to science and social studies. You can make these leaps to the things that happen right on your block and in your neighborhood and in your communities. And those everyday applications bring that richness to it and show them that we're not just studying theoretical things just to study them and pass a test. We're studying them because they apply to what your life is like. And I think show and tell type opportunities are great with that. It is also a great way for your students to show people a little bit about themselves and what their backgrounds and strengths are. I always say that one of the biggest problems we have in education is that we don't teach people the difference between ability and aptitude. And people have aptitude in all kinds of different areas. Every one of your students probably has aptitude in some area where they learn really quickly and they are interested in it and it was easy for them. Anything from skateboarding to gardening to math to whatever, everyone has a different level of aptitude in learning those things. And when they can show and tell those things that they learn quickly and effectively, it gives them confidence, it gives them value and self-respect, and it's a fun way to integrate that into your classroom. Jen, anything I miss?
No, I think you covered it. I think you covered it. And it is a great foundation as we do look at our next point of learning, which is this value-based learning. And, we hear these terms in business or, marketing, this ROI, the return on your investment. And we know that this is a strong pull for humans in general, but especially for busy working adult learners. This idea that I need to know that my efforts are actually going to pay off, that I'm not just spinning my wheels. So when I speak to students, and I do have gratefully the opportunity to do that a lot, when I speak to students, I focus on this word investment, because I will often hear students say, man, this is just a big sacrifice. And I just don't know if it's worth it. So I quickly try to turn around and say, hey, this is an investment. Yes, it's that short-term pain for that long-term gain, that there will be that payoff because we actually have a reward center in our brain. So we kind of need to make sure that we're feeding that along the way. And there's lots of different ways to do that. But this is a characteristic of that younger group of student, that Gen Z student, that is really, really prevalent in that generation. That there's this need to see the results. and emphasis on sooner the better. And this is why we could talk about this in several aspects, but this is why that immediate constructive feedback in the classroom is so very important. You know, a student may ask, you know, but why do I need to know this skill? Why do I need to learn this skill? And we can give them the short answer, right? We can say, well, this skill is going to help you pass the test. And then hopefully then the next aspect is it's going to get you a new job, or you're going to go into extended educational opportunities. But when we talk specifically about how we can help students, one of the things that we can do is to help them link what they're doing now. Yes, the skills that they need to do to prepare for the exam and the study skills that they're using to get there, to job readiness. And we're going to talk a little bit more about these types of transferable skills in a little bit. But the key here is to help students understand that, yes, they are preparing for, if they're in an HSE class, they're preparing for that test, whether they like it or not. But those skills that they're building are there for the long term, those problem solving skills, those critical thinking skills. And they have that ability to give them that personal and professional security that really is the heart of what education can do. And that's the real powerful driver in the ABE classroom and certificate completion, that life change aspect, and an even stronger financial foundation and the ability to apply for promotions and professional development, whatever it is for each person that is their why. And along the way, we are finding some really, really interesting things about retention. And we're really, really finding some interesting things about what adult students truly value. And one of them is that they want their teachers, they want the people that are trying to impart knowledge to them to be responsive, to get them, to see them, to understand them. I know that that's a big heart that Dan has in that regard, that our students are seen and that you as educators are seen as well. And it's this interesting balance that we have to get to between setting these high expectations that are either set by the test or the standards or whatever they might be, but marry those things, link those things with high belief for students. Because if we do one without the other, we're out of balance. And it can be very, very overwhelming to the students. So as educators, we have to break down these hard things into bite-sized pieces, but all along the way say, see, I'm setting this idea for you. I'm setting this goal for you because I believe that you can do it. And even just those small little statements, those small little encouragements can make a huge difference.
Just one thing. So now as we kind of have finished life-based learning and value-based learning, give yourself a score. You know, where do you track on those? Are those things that you do naturally in your classroom? Is it something that you're doing regularly, or is that an area maybe, you know, for improvement? And then let's go on to goal-based learning, Jim.
Yeah, so as we continue with this third aspect of learning, you know, adult learners benefit from breaking down these long-term goals into milestones. And we really, really have to help them celebrate what we refer to as benchmarks, you know, these tiny little progress marks. And this is that discussion that we get to have over progress versus perfection. You know, students need to see that they're making strides. Again, they need to see that their efforts are paying off. One of the analogies that we sometimes use with students is this mountain analogy, where we say, you know, no human ever stood at the bottom of a mountain and jumped to the top in one big jump. It's what we want, because again, we've got that immediate gratification desire going on. We want to just flip that switch. We want to just make that jump. But that's not really what happens, right? We take those small methodical steps along the same lines of this analogy. We might need tools. We might need guidance along the way. What do they call them, Dan? Sherpas? Or is that what guides up the mountain? We might need a proverbial Sherpa along the way.
And a Yama or two, maybe? Or
yeah, I mean,
like
we might actually fall down and skin our knees, and that might hurt, and there's pain involved in that. But when we make those steps, that's when we need to say, okay, every now and then I got to look back down that mountain and I got to say, okay, well, I'm here. And a week ago, I wasn't. A month ago, I wasn't. And we really, really need to point students toward that, because often they won't see that. They'll just see that score that they're not getting, or they'll see that, well, I failed again, I can't do this. So it's really, really important to help them in setting checklists and helping them set progress bars and look for those growth goals, not just say, well, clearly I'm a failure because I didn't score 145 on my GED practice test, or I didn't score an 8 on my high set practice test. Well, no, maybe you scored a 140, but last time you scored a 135. They've got to see that they're making those efforts and those little strides along the way. That's why we love talking to students about SMART goals, letting them take these big picture goals of, hey, I want to do this and I want to do it right now, and really, really boiling it down. We've got a great coaching session, by the way, coming up in January to address this. So if that's something that you want to lean in and talk to your students about, we'll have some resources for you there. Because what I often see with students as they're starting this goal, they, I want it now. I'm going to go after it. Yeah, I already work 40 or 50 hours a week, but I'm going to come home every day. I'm going to study for 5 hours. You might do it for a day or two, but what tends to happen when we set goals that are too big, that burnout inevitably sets in. And we don't tell ourselves, oh, maybe I just bit off much more than I could chew, or I started out of the gate too fast. We tell ourselves we can't do it. See, I knew I couldn't do this. And we try to go, from A to Z too quickly. So setting these SMART goals and helping your students really find small, measurable, achievable, reasonable, and time-bound goals is really important.
Yeah, and as you think about, so the question came up, do these come from the students or do they come from the teacher? And it really can be both. I mean, students should have goals, SMART goals, as Jen's saying, that they're working towards, and your classroom instruction should be in alignment with their end goals in a way, right? It should be supportive of that. But it's also creating opportunities for them to reach those next milestones, like Jen's saying. And that's intentional on your part as an educator. That's creating the steps in a way that students can get to it. And I think, one of the things that we don't do enough in most education classes is find alternative ways to celebrate the steps. We tend to just look at, well, did you pass that test, or did you achieve that score on a summative type assessment? And we don't celebrate streaks. Did you get here for every class for the last 4 weeks? That's amazing. That's a level of commitment that drives terrific results in the long run. Did you improve a score? Maybe you on something simple, like maybe I gave you a quiz and you got a 5 out of 10 on it, but you took that quiz and you went back and you fixed those problems and you turned it back in so you could get a 10 out of 10. The act of improving yourself like that, fixing your mistakes, staying resilient to it, those are important. And there's all kinds of different ways we can creatively celebrate the achievement of goals that are not necessarily just summative goals, but they're process goals and they're growth goals and they're personal grit kind of goals. So.
I think that's important. Dan and I both are advocates for celebrating that effort. And I think it's especially important, especially for adult learners who are busy and they are working, because maybe that's their biggest challenge. Maybe the biggest challenge for them isn't actually the content, it's being able to set aside that time to attend class or to do the actual study. So if they have one person in their life that sees, hey, I know this was difficult for you, but you hit your study time goal this week, and I know that you can keep making these strides. Sometimes that's the way they need to be seen in that effort base.
Right. Absolutely. All right. So rate yourself in terms of goal-based learning, how you have that integrated in your class. And we're going to leave these things now that are really around the context of your lesson and what those lessons look like. And we're going to move in now to kind of the goal of a lesson. What are you trying to accomplish through the teaching. And so the first one is learning that supports independence. Are you building in intentionally the idea of helping students become independent as they go through your classes, your lessons, your units, all of that? And, this doesn't happen overnight. No one just immediately, becomes independent, right? It's a long process from, childhood. We say they can leave home at 18. Most of them aren't actually independent until they're in their early 20s or whatever. And, it takes a long process to build people, to build somebody from a level of dependence to a level of independence. But, what you're doing is really modeling so much of that for them. And so setting and modeling really good expectations, what it is that you want from them, making sure that those are really clear, and then make sure that you're not duplicitous in it. Make sure that you live the expectations that you set. So if you want people to, learn to be on time and to be respectful of other people's times and things like that, you need to make sure your class starts promptly on the hour and ends when it's supposed to on the hour, so that people understand that you live the idea of that expectation. You don't just set it out there. Set high standards. If you expect people to use good grammar and good capitalization and punctuation, then make sure you're using it too. And, the way that you interact with them and communicate with them. All of that's really important because they're looking to you as a role model. They're looking to you to see, it's kind of that social learning. They're learning to see, is that how I want to conduct myself? You might even, think about here, do you have any teachers that you mimic, that you've mimicked in your life, and we're going to ask you to put some of that in chat later. So think about who those teachers were that you kind of modeled yourself after. And then I think it's important to have self-evaluation tools and teach people how to use them. A lot of people don't know how to self-evaluate, how to look at themselves critically without putting themselves down, but looking at themselves from the lens of growth and lens of trying to become better. And that's an important thing to be able to do. People who are really successful are always self-evaluating and looking for their blind spots and trying to fill those. And then review and extension opportunities give you the ability to kind of look back and look forward and help people build more. So if you think about this like from a workplace, those modeling of expectations help prepare them for what employers want. Self-evaluation gets them to ask the question, is this my best work? And if it isn't, then what could I do to make this my best work? Because we want to teach people to do their best. Nowadays, if you get a job and you show up for 6 weeks straight, and dress decently and speak well, you're going to get promoted in just about any business in America right now because they're dying for labor. They're dying for people who can add to their businesses. And if you can show some basics and then show that you want to do your best work, you're going to move forward. And then if you can do this last thing, which is really extend a little bit, what could I do a little extra? What could I do that would make just a little bit of difference? That really goes over well in any employment situation, and it carries in. And so you can model those things in your classroom. You can teach people those skill sets, and that creates independence long-term in their life. All right, Jen, we go on to learning that supports problem solving.
Sure, but before we go on, I want to note there's a really great discussion going on in the chat right now. It stemmed out of Ava's wonderful quote that she said she tells her students, you cannot stumble across mastery, you must work toward it. And I think that's so important. And it goes along then with someone else in the chat. Let me scroll down there. That is saying, yes, Fane is saying that they look at, it's Patty, sorry, is saying that she sees a lot of learned self-helplessness in her class. And I think those two things really go together, because what I often see students doing is they look at other students, they compare themselves to their classmates or people that they know that have studied for a high school equivalency, or people that they know that have prepared for college or a new job. And on the outside, it looks so easy to them. Or it might even look like this word that I hate. It might look like they've stumbled into some luck. But what they don't necessarily see, because we don't often share, is those intentional steps that we took to get there. So I love both of those things. That
Yeah. And well, just one other thought. I see Faden had said, I encourage my students to always do more than what's expected of you.
Yep.
And I think that's great. Now, the one step beyond that would be, do you give them clear opportunities to do a little more than is expected of them, right? So after they finish a lesson, are you saying, okay, if you'd like, if you, I don't know, I'm stumbling on how to say it, but you want to basically give them, to extend this lesson, you could do X, Y, Z, and see who takes you up on it. Because those are the students that then, if only one student takes you up on that extension, you praise them and you talk about how they went that extra mile. And the next time you give an opportunity for an extension, totally optional, maybe you get 2 or 3 people who do it and you praise all of them heavily. And then the next time you get 4 or 5, and you're giving them real opportunities to learn the skill of doing more than is there. So that's a great point. Appreciate that.
And we can personalize that a little bit, because Dan and I were working on something else today, and we were working on an extension activity, and it was stumping us. And
Yeah.
Dan, I think you said, why is this bothering me so much? And then when we got it, why was that so satisfying? And I said, because problem solving is fun. When you finally get to that point where you've challenged yourself, whether it's, a puzzle in the sense of work or life or whatever it might be, then that, is what really that satisfaction comes out of. Which is a nice transition into this learning that supports that all important problem solving. And I love to talk about this topic, this idea that test prep is the perfect platform for building strong critical thinking skills. And I've really, really become super passionate about this, because I've had several students that I've worked with that have gone through our program, and they've said, okay, I thank you so much. I've really, really enjoyed our time here. I've finished up. I've got my high school equivalency credential. Now I have this job interview coming up, but I don't know what to talk about. And then they say something along the lines of, because all I have been doing is studying. And this is where I get to say, but there's so much more than what you've been studying or what you've been doing and preparing for this exam. And that's where we kind of get to lift this veil behind all of the stuff that comes along with educational theory and acronyms and all of these things. Is the real reason why we do what we do, because we want them to have these transferable skills. Things like the personal motivation that it took for them to get to class on time amidst a busy schedule, and the organizational skills and time management it took to do that. Those are all skills that they're building as students. The recent brush up on written communication and basic math and tech skills that they're building in preparing for these exams, those are all things that employers want and need, because we are seeing these huge shifts in the employment market. They're hiring people more and more on who the person is and the skills that they can do. We like to call them power skills versus what system they've learned or what craft they've learned. Those things, those hard skills can be honed, but some of these people skills are a little bit harder to at least articulate. And you can really help to point that out to your students, especially here's one I get all the time. Why do we have to do algebra? Never going to use this again. And then I get to say, but we do this a lot more than what you think. We just don't call it algebra. And, if they say, well, why do the test makers want us to do this? It's because they want you to think, and that thinking really is that biggest takeaway. So anytime you have the opportunity, again, to contextualize what you're doing by linking, hey, this is an important skill in this field or that field, and knowing your students and what their interests are and pulling those things together will really, really be a huge support for that problem solving element.
Awesome. So make sure you're rating yourself now. Did you, where do you fall in terms of learning that supports independence, learning that supports problem solving? And then we'll move down to learning that supports communication. Adult students need mentorship, they need community, they need good examples of how things should look in life and see. Many of them have grown up in situations where that isn't always clearly modeled for folks. And so those positive examples are important. We've linked in this PowerPoint. So if you download the link to a presentation we did on teaching civil discourse, which is a good one in today's world to teach people how to speak back and forth about a topic without it becoming contentious, but being able to listen to someone else and to talk about difficult topics. It's kind of a shame if we have to be careful, but we also need to make sure that we don't just completely take anything that's controversial away, because people have to learn how to talk about controversial things, or we'll never get out of the mess we're in right now, where people end up just yelling at each other all the time, right? We have to teach that. So as you do, as you speak to your students, make sure that you're using your tone appropriately. Words matter, so make sure you're choosing words, grammar, your listening skills. There's some great work out there on listening skills that always can benefit us as educators to better understand how to listen to students and make them feel respected. I know you can probably do this too. I can think of 2 or 3 people right offhand that when I talk to them, if I'm face to face with them, when I talk to them, there is absolutely no question that they are 100% focused on what I am saying and what it means. And I can also think of 2 or 3 people that I can talk to at any time and they're never listening to me. They'll be looking right at me, but they're just basically formulating a response back, or they're not listening to me at all. People really clearly can tell when you're paying attention to them. And so setting those positive examples is really important. Looking for connections for classmates, that creates that community. So many of our folks come from really interesting cultures and backgrounds and experiences, and giving them the ability to hear that creates empathy and understanding and broadens folks' horizons, and that's really important. Social learning is, some of that where you're building behaviors that come from watching someone else. So I'm curious, in the chat, we talked about a minute ago, but do you have any behaviors that you can map right back to some teacher that you had? For me, it was Dr. Magliaro, my Calculus 1 teacher in college, who was so excited about teaching calculus that, he would never use an eraser. He would be in the middle of a problem, and if something was going on, he would just take the back of his hand and his shirt and, wipe off the board and just keep going. And it really, it's funny how much it impacted me, but I became a math teacher. I taught at high school and community college levels, and erasers were nowhere to be found. I would just use my hand, and it was all over my clothes at the end of the day, the chalk dust and stuff. And I loved it, but it was a relationship to what I saw him do. And that's that idea of social learning. How do students see behaviors in other people that we want? And if you have some good examples, put them in chat. We had some good ones the last time we did that. And that was a lot of fun to read some of the behaviors people have brought from their previous teachers. And then finally, look for ways to harness the positives of social media. That can create appropriate communication and community that we want. And what did I just say? Can create appropriate communication, community. Anyway, social media has a lot of potential negatives to it, but there are a lot of positives as well. We can do some good things with social media if we use it to better communicate. Somehow or another, my brain just went dead on me for a second. Jen, you were supposed to pop in and save me in that.
Well, you said it correctly. You just doubted yourself.
Oh,
So,
okay. All right.
yeah. You just let that self-doubt creep in. I'm going to let you read the chat because there's some really great examples there, and we can pull back around there. I'll let you read that
Sure.
while we move on to the next point. And we're going to kind of enter this new area now of instruction, and 3 main points of instruction. And the first one is flexibility or flexible instruction. This idea of self-direction, and again, opportunities for that autonomy, for them to own or have a greater sense of control in what they're learning, because things tend to mean more to us when we have a say, when we're moving, we're driving the boat, so to speak. And part of that comes in this idea of choice in how we learn, harnessing that power and extending opportunities to engage with students in different types of materials, because those choices and being able to choose how we learn, or maybe how we show what we're learning, are really, really powerful engagement tools. And that greater sense of engagement then, of course, is what promotes long-term memory. If we're really connected to what we're studying because we chose it, we chose that activity, then of course our brain's going to link in a little bit more to that than something that was chosen for us. But this can involve, of course, a little bit more time or creativity on the part of the educator. And we've got some great resources for you in this regard that we'll talk about as we go along as well. But one of the things that we have really tried to capture here at Essential Education, I know, is a primary directive of our instructional designers, and that is creating alternative exercises, or exercises that speak to multiple senses. That every time you start to put together instruction, while you're not going to have a perfect lesson every time that always has a visual, that always has an auditory component, that always has a hands-on component, but at least that should be one of the first thoughts in your mind, that intentional, hey, I want to reach as many learning styles as possible. Because that's something we could debate a little bit. I think we're moving away from, Dan's a visual learner and Jen's an auditory learner. We're getting, well, sometimes Dan's a little bit of this or a little bit of that, and Jen's probably all over the place most days. That what we really benefit from is this multisensory learning. So consider alternating the different types of exercises or the delivery of those exercises to improve that engagement. Access to additional resources, that's always something that is super helpful. We have lots of resources for you through professional developments that we have. We have extra resources in live coaching sessions that support those study skills for your students. And then, of course, within the programs, our digital platform, we build in closed captioning and transcripts and opportunities for students to jump ahead or go back and review. So we kind of take some of the guesswork of that out for you. And then this is a place I think we could camp out for quite some time. Always keep in mind, and again, another one of those intentional things, to allow those opportunities for feedback. In-class activities, practice test details, additional instruction, test-aligned writing reviews, all of these things help students build that perseverance. I know there was some talk in the chat there about how students avoid failure. Nobody wants to fail, right? We don't want to put ourselves out there, but that's not requires. My kids and I were just talking about this the other day because we were watching Home Alone, and there's a section in there or Home Alone 2, where Kevin is saying, I got these rollerblades for Christmas, but I was too scared to use them outside. So I just kind of wore them in my room a couple of times, and then I outgrew them. So we've got to really help our students find that safe place where they can take those steps, where they can feel like, hey, I'm going to put myself out there. And even if this doesn't work out, I know what I learned from this will be valuable. And we can show them that with the way that we give them feedback. And it's really a great opportunity to build unbelievable relationships with your students.
Yeah, there's one of my favorite quotes is by Pat Summitt, the all-time winningest coach, I think, anywhere, from the Tennessee Volunteers. women's basketball. And she said, in the absence of feedback, people will assume the negative or that you don't care. And I think that's such a powerful, element to adult ed. People need to have feedback, and we have to really build it in intentionally in a lot of ways. So Awesome. Well, let's talk about well-timed instruction then. Remember to be rating yourself on all of these. This one I think is really important because it relates back to that idea of aptitude. People simply learn at different speeds. You might learn auto mechanics fast and gardening slow. You might learn grammar fast and math slow. It isn't an issue of your ability. It is simply an issue of your speed at which your brain can integrate the learning. And that's so important because people don't ever teach that to adult learners. They just think, well, I didn't learn it when everybody else did, so I must be dumb. And that's not the case. It's just a speed issue. And I think spaced learning is really important. And it's something that, if you go back and look at your classroom and look at your lessons, how much time are you giving people to absorb, to formulate, connect, struggle with some piece of learning? And this was really like, I've learned this to apply this in lots of different ways. When we work on a project at a team here, as a team at Essential Ed, oftentimes you need to introduce an idea and say, let's come back to this, tomorrow. Everybody think on it tonight, come up with your ideas, process, react to it, let your brain stew on it. Sometimes your brain just needs your subconscious will work on it, on a problem or something while you're not even consciously aware of it. And so giving people space to absorb and contextualize and connect and file learning is really, really important. So make sure that you're thinking about how you're spacing that chunk of information and the time you're giving people to react to it. Another thing you can do that has to do with timing of instruction is to make sure that you're doing some sort of recaps, end of week, end of month, however you want to space it, end of unit, but creating that place where you are timing a review that brings everything back together. Super important. People need, like I always say, I finally learned all my Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2 when I took pre-calculus, because pre-calculus put all three of those things under an umbrella that made sense to me. And so it brought all of them together. In isolation, I did okay in them, but I never really got it until I had this bigger view of it, this higher vantage. Make sure that you identify and support time-based obstacles. Students will have those. So you need to think about how are you building in things so that they can do them at their own pace, they can integrate them into their busy life. Are you providing the scaffolding that they need? Are there iterative approaches where you can break something down and say, this is going to be complex. So we're going to take it into smaller pieces, then we're going to put the smaller pieces into a little bit bigger pieces, and then we're going to put them all together under one big umbrella. And whether we're really intentionally mapping that out or not is all elements of whether or not your instruction would be classified as well-timed. So give yourself a score on that one, and Jen is going to bring us home with diversified instruction.
I will. And I have to note, I love some of the conversations that are happening in chat, really that boil down to our ability to be really authentic with students, open about our own mistakes. There was a great comment about, sometimes I just don't even try to hide that I've lost my train of thought when I'm teaching a lesson, because it does, like, it breaks down any kind of, barrier, space, or wall that might be there between I'm the teacher and I know everything and you're the student and you know nothing. We don't want to present that, but sometimes just cultural norms kind of separate that and they make that divide. So anything we can do to break that down. I always say the bigger dork you can be in a situation like that. It doesn't apply just as a middle school teacher, it applies across the board. So, well, we've been alluding to this the whole time, this idea of diversified instruction, the knowledge that we have that we know that learners thrive when they are given opportunities to engage and interact with material in lots of different ways. And whenever you look up a definition of diversification or diversified instruction, you're going to see some of these key cogs. You're going to see varied content, delivery, and assessment, basing those things on the varied needs of student interest or their own backgrounds or readiness. All of these things then are a trickle-down effect, or at least a circular effect, to then the pace and the path of the class, the path of that instruction. Non-traditional students do. I mean, we know it. We've seen the brain research. We know it as we age. We tend to tap into this, that as adults, you tend to learn slower. But when you do, if it's framed in the right way, that learning can be so much deeper because we're able to link what we're learning to real world experiences. And so then that does require that contextualization and us making and pointing out some of those key connections. And really this idea, and we've touched on this in several aspects, but I really want to just hammer this home, this varied models of success. I think that, again, we've got this on-off, either I'm successful or I'm not, either I failed or I didn't fail. And we get this incredible opportunity to remind our students that progress looks different for each student. I began my teaching career in a lower school and K-12 environment. And one of my favorite projects that I did with first graders is something I talk about with my adult students all the time. And it's this bean seed project where you came in and you had these bean seeds and you gave all of the kids, those little Dixie cups, and you put them, everybody had the same soil, and you pushed a little seed down there in the Dixie cup, and everybody had the same amount of water and the same amount of sunlight. And just like adults, we want that instant turnaround. So the kids would go out to recess and then they'd come back in and they'd be disappointed that their sprout hadn't already come up above the soil. But what got really interesting was watching over the course of the next few days when they would start to look at each other's plants and they would say, well, why? Dan's plant's higher than mine and mine hasn't popped up yet. And that one already has a leaf on it. And we again play this comparison game. But my favorite part of that lesson was on the last day, being able to pull that seed out of the little cup and shake off that soil and show them those roots that were developing the whole time. Show them that, you may not have seen that immediate progress, but all of these roots were developing this whole time. And it may just be that your version of success looks different than someone else's version of success. And not only is that okay, it's what makes learning and human beings and society so much fun, because we all bring all of these different aspects. So the more that we can diversify and integrate our community of learners, I see great things happening in the chat about how this is so much fun, because that's what we're doing today. We're bringing in different perspectives. And so we do have some resources that we want to point you to in this regard, because I think we've all been to professional developments where they said, hey, go do this, go forth and prosper. And then they say, good luck in finding resources to do that with. So we've got some great resources that will point you toward. We just finished a 3D differentiation guide that's got some really practical activities to walk through with your students to vary that content delivery and assessment, and then some other professional development opportunities that we have coming up as well.
Awesome. You're going to have to find the link to the 3D guide because I can't do it while I'm presenting.
I will.
Okay.
I will. I'll
All
do
right.
that. So give me some talking time there.
Yeah, I'll do that now. So, so again, we want you to come back and think about these 9 elements. The first 3 were really around the context of your lesson. Is it built towards life-based, value-based, or goal-based learning? The next 3 really looked at the goal of your lesson to help students become independent, to support problem solving, to support communication. all of those really leading towards jobs and good life quality. And then the third was really around the structure of your lesson. Are you taking the time to make sure that it's flexible, well-timed, and diversified? So hopefully you've been kind of keeping a 1 through 10 scale on each one. If you're comfortable doing it, we'd love to have you drop into chat, maybe the one that you feel like you'd like to work on this next semester or next part of the school year. It's good feedback for us to understand kind of what are the areas, and maybe we could even build something in the future that goes even more in depth into those types of areas. So if you're comfortable doing that, we'd love to see that in the chat box as well. I'm also going to put, and Jen's going to add this, Jen's going to add the link to our 3D guide that was just created. And this is a free download that you can get from us. And it's a really powerful resource. Jen did the largest amount of work on it. It's really a phenomenal tool that you can use in your classrooms to differentiate instruction. If you like this webinar and this type of webinar, we do these every other month. We call it TWEED, Tuesdays with Essential Education. And we do topics like this every even month. And in this next year, we're even going to create a new professional learning community that will extend those. So I put in the chat a link to our live sessions. If you click on that link, you can sign up for the next one, which is going to be next Tuesday. And we're real excited about it because it's how to take it's going from examples to exemplary, ways that you can really increase and change the way you're using examples in your classroom. And so you can sign up for those. They're always free. We send you the recording, even if you can't attend at the time, just sign up for it. You'll get the deck, the recording, and the certificate afterwards. And any of those that you can you want to do, you can even go back and see some of our other ones that we've done in the past. But we're excited about this next one coming up, and there's links to that, and we'll add the link to the 3D guide a little bit more in here too, so there's pop back in here in case you missed it. And let's see, Jen, we got a little bit of research to talk to him about here. There was your self-evaluation. We did that. Here's some of the research sites.
Sure, we do. These were just some great articles, some great instruction that we found that added in not only to the 3D guide, but for what we put together for you all today to learn a little bit more about adult learners, what makes them tick, how they think, and then maybe some crossover things that may have started as a K-12 component to differentiation, but then developed into, a larger, hey, people in general learn this way.
Awesome. And I see someone says the link didn't work.
I know. I'm just going back up to check that now. Let me go back.
It could be your settings, Teresa, on your firewall too. Okay, so some people
Teresa, I'd try that because it opened right up for me. So anybody else, let us know if you have a problem with it though.
Yeah, if you're having any problems, you could copy the link and email it to yourself, like your personal email or something like that, and then probably open it off that. It's probably your firewall at your particular site that's blocking it. So we're right at 1 minute left. We want to thank you guys for being here today. Really appreciate all you do in adult education. It's an honor to stand at your side and work next to you and helping adults change their lives. We appreciate you taking time here at the end of the year. Hope you have a phenomenal holiday season and get the rest and rejuvenation that you need and deserve so you can launch into 2023 and do the most good work for your folks. So thank you all very much. Have a wonderful, safe holidays, and we'll see you in 2023.
Absolutely.
Dan.
Bye, everyone.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jen. Dan, that was an amazing webinar. Thank you. Thank you both so much. I want to thank everybody for participating today. As a reminder, this webinar will be posted on our website and will be available to replay within about 24 hours of the conclusion today. If you could take a minute before you log off, just to fill out our quick 1-question poll. I would imagine it's going to be really good today because that was amazing. And so once again, Dan, Jen, thank you so much. Thank you to Essential Education for being such a valued partner to COABE. We appreciate it very much, and all the work that you're doing in the field of adult education and adult literacy. It is greatly appreciated and makes a huge impact. And so
well,
thank you.
Thanks back to you. COABE is amazing. You guys are just crushing it. So
Yeah.
love being partners. Yeah.
So thanks again, everybody. I hope everybody has a great rest of the day and a great weekend. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.